Excerpt from the official 1st of the 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment after action report from the 1944 invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord.
As the 401st Glider Infantry Battalion was at full strength and fresh, Colonel Sink planned to have it lead the attack through Vierville toward Saint-Côme-du-Mont, to be followed by the 1st Battalion, the 2nd Battalion, regimental headquarters, a platoon of 8 attached anti-tank guns, and a platoon of engineers. The strength of the 1st Battalion was unpretentious. A Company numbered around 40, B Company had nearly 50, C Company totaled 30-odd, and Headquarters Company approximately 50. The attack was planned for 0430 hours on the 7th of June. The Glider Battalion failed to appear at the appointed time, and the 1st Battalion was given the mission of leading the attack. B Company was ordered to take responsibility for 200 yards on the right of the road, C Company 200 yards on the left of the road, and A and Headquarters Companies were ordered to follow on the road. The Battalion S4 had been active during the night, and as the companies passed the IP on time, rations and a limited quantity of ammunition were handed out. B Company was harassed by sniper fire which came from the hedgerows to its front and right. Consequently, its progress was slow. C Company, moving in a line of platoons in column along adjacent hedgerows, had no contact with the enemy until reaching the highway from the beach to Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Here, at the north of Vierville, C Company was engaged by approximately a platoon. The company deployed on both sides of the road and sent one squad around the extreme left flank to attempt to dislodge the enemy from the hedgerows. This squad did not move far enough to the left and was outflanked and pinned down by fire. B Company had come up to Vierville on the right of the road and was preparing to continue toward the south, when General Taylor and Colonel Sink contacted Colonel Turner in the Vierville church. Headquarters and companies had continued on the road into Vierville without opposition. Colonel Sink had received information that elements of the 3rd Battalion had held their objective, so he ordered the 1st Battalion toward a crossroads to the south of Saint-Côme-du-Mont. As C Company was still engaged, A Company was ordered to take C Company's position on the left of the road, and C Company was ordered to disengage and take A Company's place in the column. C Company requested an anti-tank gun to assist in disengaging the forward squad. This gun was made available by the regimental commander, and with it the hedgerows in which the enemy was concealed were taken under direct fire, relieving the pressure on the squad so that it withdrew without suffering any casualties. The enemy did, however, pursue the squad along the hedgerows, so that when the squad had rejoined the company at the edge of the town, and the company had proceeded south on the road toward Saint-Côme-du-Mont, the 2nd Battalion, following on the road, was taken under fire while in the town and pinned down for several hours. The progress of B and A companies, after leaving Vierville, was slow. The enemy occupied the hedgerows, particularly in the right of the road, and forward progress by B Company was made by sending out units to outflank the enemy positions, whereupon the enemy would withdraw one hedgerow to his rear, and the same process would have to be repeated. The smokeless, flashless properties of the enemy's ammunition and his skill at camouflaging himself and his positions made it extremely difficult to locate the precise location from which he was firing. The hedgerows deserve more than just passing comment, for they had a direct effect on the tactics employed by units of all echelons. The French farmers considered them as part of the economy of the land, as they served in a variety of ways. A hedgerow was at once a permanent fence which required little or no maintenance, a plot of ground which supported the growth of small trees and brush, providing the farmer with his cooking and heating fuel, a cover to birds and small animals for his table, a vineyard from which he harvested berries, a barrier for the control of surface drainage and erosion, and, not the least important, a windbreak, protecting his crops from channel storms. The Germans integrated these barricades into their defenses. Throughout the hedgerows, and particularly the intersections, they dug spider holes, carefully removing the soil and retaining the natural appearance of the position. These provided a series of pre-constructed outpost lines or defensive lines, which could be manned by a minimum of troops, and permitted the greatest flexibility of movement to the defenders. The trees and brush were ideal for the erection and concealment of telephone wire, as they screened observation from everywhere except the air. The hedgerows were thick enough to give protection from the fire of all weapons, except direct hits of artillery. The ditches at the base of each side of the hedgerows were available for protection when the attacker employed his mortars, so that the only effective fire which could be placed on defending troops was direct hits in the ditches or on the spider holes. The advantages of the hedgerow systems were predominantly with the defender through his knowledge of the terrain and the location of the pre-constructed emplacements. A small holding force could delay a relatively large force and cause it to deploy, bring up its mortars, search the suspected hedgerow, and probe extensively to the flanks. The decision to abandon the position remained with the defender until anti-tank weapons could be brought up, and by direct short-range fire, blast open the spider hole. This method, while effective, was costly in gun crews and embarrassingly slow, for a squad could delay a battalion for a matter of hours. While training in England, the division had maneuvered in the Slapton Sands area on the south coast. This area had been chosen as it most nearly represented the terrain of Normandy. The hedgerows, the clay soil, the Norman-type architecture, the deep sunken roads, and the tactics were essentially the same as were later seen in Normandy. Unfortunately, the tactics at Slapton Sands and for the first few days in Normandy were confined to maneuvering along the road nets, and the tremendous tactical benefits which could have been gained through better use of the Slapton Sands area were lost. The distance from Vierville to Beaumont by road is less than 1,700 yards, yet it took approximately an hour and a half for the 1st Battalion to reach this small cluster of farm buildings. Here, the line was slowly straightened when B Company pulled up alongside of A Company, which had had relatively open terrain on its flank and had progressed more rapidly. It was here also that the first organized defensive position, occupied in strength, was reached. On the right of the road, in B Company's sector, was a farmhouse surrounded by orchards. It was on commanding ground, and area around it had been built up into a strong defensive position. Connecting trenches ran down the hill to the house, where they branched off in all directions and gave clear fields of fire and excellent routes of withdrawal. B Company, in its forward push, had pressed the enemy back to the house, but could not stretch its already thin line further, to ensure that the house and the adjacent trenches were cleared. These positions, reoccupied by the enemy in B Company, was taken under heavy fire, suffering several casualties. At approximately the same time, accurate mortar fire fell on the crossroad at Beaumont, and continued to fall intermittently throughout the remainder of the time the battalion operated in that area. A Company, pushing off again on the left, was stopped immediately by machine gun fire from the hedgerows to its direct front. Previously, in the morning's advance, most of the opposition had been rifle fire, but this fire was much heavier in volume, and the casualties inflicted in the first skirmish with this position were heavy. About 7 men from B Company had become casualties since leaving Vierville. A Company now lost 5, and C Company and Headquarters Company together had lost another 5 from mortar fire on the road. Shortly before noon, 3 light tanks from the beach joined the battalion at Beaumont. They were sent up the road toward the head of the column, where Colonel Turner and the tank commander decided to attempt to knock out the machine gun positions by tank artillery fire. To point out targets, Colonel Turner, who was a former cavalry officer, got into the lead tank and it started down the road. It had gone but a few yards when Colonel Turner, who was standing up in the turret, was shot through the head and killed instantly. The news of this misfortune spread rapidly through the battalion and served to split the battalion into 4 separate companies. Colonel Turner was a slight, aggressive individual and had been with the battalion since its activation. He had dominated his staff and company commanders, but his strong character had been a source of inspiration and confidence to the battalion. His executive officer had only one previous opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities to the battalion, and that had been an unfortunate experience on the occasion of Colonel Turner's only leave. The incident had occurred on the last battalion exercise prior to moving to the marshalling area. It had been a cold, miserable night, and nothing had been accomplished according to plan. The route had been lost, and there was much marching without purpose. The troops chose to ignore the difficulties of the terrain, the complete darkness, and other inadvertent misfortunes, and laid full blame for their misery, whether or not it was justified, on the acting battalion commander. Although Colonel Turner had been a strict disciplinarian and had been exacting with his officers and men, he was respected by all. So it was the news of his death and the lack of confidence in the new commander that reduced the morale of the battalion to a low point. Another tank was struck by a German rocket, and all the tanks withdrew to the crossroad where shortly after, on Colonel Sink's order, they moved to Angoville-au-Plain to assist the 2nd Battalion in clearing out that town. B Company continued to press toward the farm buildings on its right flank with little success. A 57mm anti-tank piece was brought forward and pushed through the hedgerows to bring direct fire on the farmhouse and the trench system, and B Company was then able to clear out this area. While B Company was mopping up, C Company was committed to the attack with instructions to probe to the left and endeavor to locate and envelop the enemy flank. C Company moved laterally along the road toward Angoville-au-Plain for about 400 yards, then turned to the right, and in a column of files with one squad, one hedgerow out on each flank for security, made its first probe. This probe was successful only in determining that the enemy occupied the hedgerows here in as great strength as at Beaumont. Several machine guns brought fire on the company, and it retired to the road and attempted another probe further to the left. This attack was just getting underway when the company was ordered back to Beaumont. B Company's success in clearing out the farmyard was to be exploited, and it was planned to move the battalion through B Company's sector and continue the drive toward the Saint-Côme-du-Mont crossroad. Before the plan was implemented, the enemy moved in again and occupied the farmyard, and brought fire on the troops at Beaumont. 2 of the tanks rejoined the battalion, and once more B Company assaulted the farm buildings, this time to meet even stronger resistance, and after receiving more casualties, withdrew to Beaumont. Colonel Sink, upon being informed of the situation, decided that more of a force was needed than the 1st Battalion could muster, and D Company was attached. D Company, consisting of more than 90 men and probably the largest company in the regiment, was attached to the 1st Battalion, 75, at 1630 hours, and ordered to assist B Company by fire from a position about 400 yards to the north of the farm buildings. With this assistance, the 2 tanks and the 57 B Company pushed the enemy back from the farm again. C Company was then ordered to relieve B Company and hold the farm position until the battalion could move out of Beaumont. A heavy concentration of mortar fire was delivered on the crossroad during this relief, and additional casualties were incurred. By this time, the troops were utterly fatigued. They had little or no sleep for more than 52 hours. They had experienced the emotional strain of a parachute jump. They had been continually active, either marching, fighting, patrolling, or sitting out the nights under most trying circumstances. They were losing confidence in their commander and his ability to get the battalion moving. They were bushed. They had almost had it. D Company was recalled from its position and ordered to move down the road immediately towards Saint-Côme-du-Mont. 1 tank was to be loaded with the wounded and was ordered to the Angoville-au-Plain aid station. The other tank was ordered to support C Company until the column had cleared the crossroad. Headquarters, A, B, and C Companies, were to follow the relatively fresh D Company in that order. At 2100 hours, D Company moved out down the road, which a few hours before had been so heavily defended. Its progress was so fast that the fatigued men of the battalion had difficulty in keeping pace. The commander of D Company had been given the briefest orientation when he was ordered forward. Consequently, he and his men knew only that there was supposed to be friendly troops somewhere in the vicinity of the crossroads south of Saint-Côme-du-Mont, their objective. As they approached the crossroad east of Saint-Côme-du-Mont, they put up orange flares, the signal of friendly troops. The flares brought down a blast of fire from both flanks, and D Company was halted momentarily in the ditches on both sides of the road. The word was passed back down the column for the tank to come forward. It left the Beaumont crossroad in response to the message, just as the last of C Company was falling in on the road. Within a few minutes, another message was passed back. Machine guns to the head of the column. All of the machine gun crews ran forward. While they were still running down the road, another message came back, calling for the bazookas to come to the head of the column, and all of the rocket launcher crews double-timed toward the head of the column. It was nearly dark, and visibility was limited to the hedgerow nearest the flanks, and to about 10 yards to the front and rear. Upon arrival at the head of the column, the tank fired with good effect to the flanks, and forced the Germans to keep down while the column regained its momentum and pushed ahead. All of D Company and most of Headquarters and A Companies cleared the crossroad east of Saint-Côme-du-Mont without suffering casualties and continued toward the objective about 700 yards to the front. The Germans permitted this much of the column to pass, then, from positions north and east of Saint-Côme-du-Mont, brought heavy fire upon the column. This was a little too much for the troops just about to start their third day of fighting without rest. The battalion commander, his S3, and the company commanders of headquarters and A companies were with D company to the front, along with all of the machine guns and rocket launchers. Someone along the line passed the word, "Pull back," and the tail of the column recoiled into Beaumont. The battalion adjutant at the rear directed the companies into assembly areas around the crossroad as they came in, and an effort was made to determine who had ordered the withdrawal. This point still remains in doubt. None of the officers would admit having originated the message, and not all of the men could be interviewed in the dark. It was the opinion of the most reliable observers that the enemy was too strong at the front to permit another attempt to rejoin the battalion until automatic weapons could be obtained. Meanwhile, D Company with the tank had pushed on to the objective and occupied a strong defensive position prepared by the Germans. By midnight, the forward elements of the battalion were well disposed to hold until morning. It was with considerable surprise that the battalion commander received, at 00:15 hours, a radio message to return to Beaumont. At 00:30 hours, the return was well underway, and at 01:30 hours, the battalion had closed in Beaumont. The tank had been knocked out by a German rocket on the objective, and the body of one of the tank crew was blown out of the tank into the ditch at the side of the road where it burned. The crossroad was subsequently referred to as Dead Man's Corner, to distinguish it from another crossroad, the one to the east of Saint-Côme-du-Mont.
Want to hear the full story? Click the link and enjoy. And for more epic content, subscribe to The Shadows and the Past.